The freezing rain hit Violet Walsh's face like needles as she stepped off the stagecoach in Caldwell, Idaho, her threadbare coat doing nothing to protect her from the bitter November cold of 1883. She clutched the worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in this world and squinted through the downpour at the muddy Main Street, searching for the man whose letters had promised her a home, a husband, and a fresh start far from the poverty that had consumed her life in Boston. The stage driver tossed her trunk into the mud without ceremony, and Violet winced as it landed with a splash. She had spent 3 grueling weeks traveling west, sustained only by the hope that Samuel Pritchard would be the decent man his carefully penned letters suggested. At 22 years old, she had no family left, no prospects, and no other options. Her mother had died of consumption 2 years ago, and the textile mill where Violet had worked 16-hour days had burned down 6 months past. When the matrimonial agency had shown her Samuel's advertisement seeking a wife, she had grasped at it like a drowning woman reaching for driftwood. Now, as she stood shivering in the storm, watching the stagecoach pull away in a spray of mud and water, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The town looked rough and unfinished, with wooden buildings lining a street that had turned into a river of mud. A few hardy souls hurried past with their heads down, paying her no attention. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding beneath the heavy clouds. She picked up her trunk with trembling hands, the cold seeping through her gloves, and made her way toward the building Samuel had mentioned in his last letter. The Silver Spur Saloon was supposed to be easy to find, he had written, and she would locate him there or at the general store next door. Her boots squelched in the mud, and icy water soaked through to her stockings. By the time she reached the saloon, her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. The warmth inside hit her like a wall, and for a moment she simply stood there, dripping on the wooden floor, grateful to be out of the rain. A handful of men sat at tables nursing drinks, and they all turned to stare at her. She recognized that look, the one men got when they saw something they wanted, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself despite the warmth. "Can I help you, miss?" The bartender was an older man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "I'm looking for Samuel Pritchard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Violet Walsh. I've come from Boston to marry him." The bartender's expression shifted to something like pity, and Violet's stomach dropped. "He's over there," the man said, gesturing to a corner table where a portly man in his 50s sat with a much younger woman perched on his lap. Violet's vision swam for a moment. She recognized Samuel from the daguerreotype he had sent, though he looked older and heavier in person. The woman with him could not have been more than 18, with glossy black hair and a dress cut scandalously low. As Violet watched, frozen in place, Samuel whispered something in the girl's ear that made her giggle. She forced her feet to move, her trunk bumping against her leg with each step. When she reached the table, Samuel looked up at her with bleary eyes clearly deep in his cups. His gaze traveled over her bedraggled appearance with obvious distaste. "Samuel Pritchard?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm Violet Walsh, your bride." The saloon had gone quiet. Samuel's face flushed red, and he pushed the woman off his lap with enough force that she stumbled. "Now hold on," he said, his words slurring slightly. "There's been a change of plans." Violet felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but she kept her chin up. "What sort of change?" "Well, I wrote those letters months ago," Samuel said, not meeting her eyes. "Things are different now. I've taken up with Leela here." He gestured to the young woman, who was watching the exchange with cruel amusement. "Didn't figure you'd actually come all this way." "You asked me to marry you," Violet said, and she hated how her voice shook. I sold everything I had to pay for the journey. I have nowhere else to go. Samuel shrugged, and that casual gesture hurt worse than anything else. That's not my problem. I never signed any contract. You came here of your own free will. You gave me your word. The words came out stronger now, anger burning through the fear. Your letters said you were an honorable man. Look at you, Samuel said, his lip curling. You're all skin and bones, probably older than you said in your letters. And you look half drowned. I want a real woman, not some starving mouse from the East. He pulled Leela back onto his lap possessively. Now get out of here before you embarrass yourself further. The laughter that erupted from some of the other patrons made Violet's face burn. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but she would not give them the satisfaction. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Wait. The bartender's voice stopped her. You cannot go back out there in this weather with nowhere to go. I have no choice, she said quietly. I have no money left, not even enough for a room. The bartender looked troubled, but before he could respond, a voice from behind him spoke up. Actually, I might have a solution to that. Violet turned to see a woman emerging from a back room, older than Violet by perhaps 15 years, with auburn hair touched with gray and a no-nonsense expression. I'm Martha Henderson. I run the boarding house 2 streets over. I could use some help with the cleaning and cooking. Room and board in exchange for work and a small wage once you've proven yourself. It was charity, Violet knew, but she was in no position to refuse. Thank you, she managed. That's very kind. Martha's expression softened slightly. Come on then. Let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. As they stepped back out into the freezing rain, Martha held a large oilskin coat over both their heads. Samuel Pritchard is a fool, she said matter-of-factly. But that's the way of men sometimes. They do not know what they want until it's too late. Violet said nothing, too numb to form words. The rain seemed even colder now, and she stumbled on the uneven ground. Martha caught her elbow and steadied her. The boarding house was larger than Violet had expected, a 2-story structure that looked well-maintained despite the harsh weather. Martha led her around to a side entrance and up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves. It's not much, Martha said, lighting a lamp. But it's warm and dry. Get out of those clothes and wrap yourself in the quilts. I will bring you something hot to drink. Left alone, Violet peeled off her soaked clothing with shaking hands. Her trunk had survived the journey relatively intact, and she pulled out a dry nightgown and heavy shawl. The quilts smelled of lavender and sunshine, and she burrowed into them gratefully. She could hear the rain hammering on the roof just above her head, and somewhere in the house, voices murmured. Martha returned with a steaming mug of broth and a thick slice of bread. Drink this slowly, she instructed. Your body needs to warm from the inside. Why are you helping me? Violet asked. You do not know me. Martha settled into the room's single chair with a sigh. Because I was you 20 years ago, different circumstances but the same desperation. A woman named Catherine gave me a chance when no one else would. She's gone now, but I remember what it felt like to have someone show me kindness when I needed it most. Violet sipped the broth, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. I do not know how I'll ever repay you. Just work hard and be honest, Martha said. That's all I ask. Now rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. After Martha left, Violet lay in the darkness listening to the storm. She had never felt so alone in her life. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had dreamed about during those long weeks of travel, had been shattered in the space of 5 minutes. Samuel's cruel words echoed in her mind, and she wondered if he was right. Maybe she was too thin, too plain, too much of a mouse to deserve happiness. Sleep came fitfully, and she woke to pale morning light filtering through the small window. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds. Her body ached from the journey and from sleeping tensely, and her eyes felt gritty from unshed tears. Martha knocked on the door and entered with a simple brown dress draped over her arm. "This should fit you reasonably well," she said. "We start breakfast at 5 in the morning for the boarders. Most of them are ranch hands and workers from the sawmill. They eat early and eat a lot." The work was harder than anything Violet had done at the textile mill. She hauled water, scrubbed floors, kneaded bread dough until her arms burned, and washed mountains of dishes and linens. Martha ran her boarding house with military precision, and she expected perfection. But she was never cruel, and when Violet struggled with a task, Martha showed her the proper way to do it without making her feel stupid. The boarders were a rotating cast of rough men who tracked in mud and tobacco juice and said little beyond grunts of thanks for their meals. Violet kept her head down and her eyes averted, serving food and cleaning up after them without engaging in conversation. She had learned quickly that drawing attention to herself rarely led to anything good. A week passed, then 2. The weather grew colder, and snow began to fall in earnest. Violet's hands became chapped and raw despite the lard Martha gave her to rub on them. She fell into bed each night exhausted, but at least the work kept her from thinking too much about her situation. She had survived. That was something. It was a Monday morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, when everything changed. Violet was in the kitchen rolling out biscuit dough when she heard the front door open and Martha's voice greeting someone with unusual warmth. "Flynn, what brings you to town?" "I thought you were snowed in at the ranch." "Nearly were," a man's voice replied, deep and steady. "Made it in just ahead of the worst of the storm. Needed supplies and figured I would check on you while I was here." "You're a good boy," Martha said, and Violet could hear the smile in her voice. "Come have some coffee." "Violet, bring out a cup for Flynn Henderson, please." Violet wiped her floury hands on her apron and picked up the coffee pot. When she entered the dining room, she saw Martha sitting at one of the tables with a man who made the room seem smaller just by being in it. Flynn Henderson stood as she approached, which surprised her. Most men did not bother with such courtesies for a boarding house servant. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore working clothes, denim pants and a heavy coat, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Madam," he said, nodding to her as she poured his coffee. Violet mumbled something that might have been a greeting and hurried back to the kitchen, her heart pounding for reasons she could not explain. Through the doorway, she heard Martha and Flynn talking in low voices. "Who's the new girl?" Flynn asked. "That's Violet. She arrived from Boston about 3 weeks ago. Came to marry Samuel Pritchard, if you can believe it." Flynn made a disgusted sound. "That snake. Let me guess, he turned her away." "Cruelly, from what I heard. She had nowhere to go, so I took her in. She's a hard worker, Flynn. Never complains, no matter how difficult the task." There was a pause, and Violet found herself straining to hear Flynn's response. "She looks half-starved. She's getting better. I am making sure she eats proper meals. But yes, she had a hard time before she came here." Martha's voice dropped even lower. "Keep an eye out for trouble, will you? Some of the men in town have noticed her, and you know how that goes." "I will," Flynn promised. They talked of other things after that, ranch business and weather predictions and mutual acquaintances. Violet tried to focus on her biscuits, but she kept stealing glances at Flynn through the doorway. There was something about him that felt different from other men she had encountered. He spoke to Martha with genuine affection and respect, and his movements were economical and purposeful rather than the swaggering bravado most cowboys affected. When Flynn finally left, Martha came into the kitchen with his empty coffee cup. "Flynn is my nephew," she said, as if she had felt Violet's curiosity. "His father was my brother. Both his parents died of influenza 5 years ago. He runs their ranch now, about 10 miles north of town. He's a good man, Violet, one of the best I know." Violet nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She told herself it did not matter whether Flynn Henderson was good or not. She was in no position to think about men, good or otherwise. She had learned her lesson about trust and hope. But she found herself thinking about him anyway as she worked through the day. The way he had stood when she entered the room, the concern in his voice when he asked about her, the kindness in his eyes. She shook her head, angry at herself. This was exactly the kind of foolishness that had led her to believe Samuel Pritchard's letters, to imagine a life that could never exist for someone like her. The next morning brought a massive storm that howled around the boarding house like a living thing. Snow piled against the windows, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the glass. Martha had Violet stoking fires in every room, and they went through their entire supply of firewood by midday. "We need more wood," Martha said, staring at the dwindling pile with worry. "The storm is supposed to last for days, and we will freeze without it." "Where can we get more?" Violet asked. "There's a woodlot behind the general store, but in this weather—" Martha trailed off, looking toward the window where snow swirled so thickly that the buildings across the street were invisible. Before Violet could respond, someone pounded on the door. Martha opened it to reveal Flynn, snow-covered and leading a horse laden with split firewood. "Figured you might be running low," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "This should last you through the worst of it." "Flynn Henderson, you're going to catch your death," Martha scolded, but her relief was obvious. "Get inside and warm up." Flynn and Violet made several trips hauling the wood inside and stacking it near the fireplaces. Despite the cold, Flynn worked efficiently, his breath misting in the frigid air. When they finished, Martha insisted he stay for a meal. "The roads will be impassable now," she said. "You cannot make it back to the ranch in this. You will stay here tonight." Flynn looked like he wanted to argue, but another glance at the window changed his mind. "If it's not too much trouble." "Nonsense. Violet set another place for supper. We're having stew." The boarding house was fuller than usual that night, as others had been caught in town by the storm. Violet served the meal with Martha's help, ladling out generous portions of venison stew and passing around fresh bread. The warmth of so many bodies and the blazing fires made the room almost cozy despite the storm's fury outside. After supper, some of the men played cards while others told stories. Violet was washing dishes in the kitchen when Flynn appeared in the doorway with his own empty bowl. "You do not have to do that," she said quickly. "I will collect the dishes." "I know," he said simply, setting the bowl on the counter, "but I was raised to clean up after myself." He paused, then added, "My aunt says you came from Boston." Violet nodded, not looking at him. "Yes." "That's a long journey." "Yes," she said again, scrubbing at a pot with more force than necessary. Flynn was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "I am sorry about what happened with Pritchard. He's a coward and a fool." The unexpected kindness made Violet's throat tighten. "It does not matter now." "It does matter," Flynn said firmly. "You deserved better than that. Any woman would." Violet finally looked up at him, searching his face for mockery or pity, but she found only honest compassion. "Why do you care?" Flynn seemed to consider the question carefully. "Because I know what it's like to have your life turned upside down through no fault of your own. When my parents died, I was 23 years old and suddenly responsible for an entire ranch. People in town did not think I could do it. Said I was too young, too inexperienced. But a few people gave me a chance, believed in me when they did not have to. My aunt was one of them, so I try to do the same for others when I can. I am not your responsibility, Violet said quietly. No, Flynn agreed. But that does not mean I cannot care about what happens to you. Before Violet could respond, one of the other boarders called for Flynn to join the card game, and he left with a final nod. Violet stood alone in the kitchen, her hands submerged in cooling dishwater, trying to understand the strange flutter in her chest. The storm lasted 3 days. Flynn helped with the heavy work around the boarding house, chopping more firewood, shoveling paths through the snow, and repairing a shutter that had torn loose in the wind. Violet found herself acutely aware of his presence, and she caught him watching her more than once with an expression she could not quite read. On the third evening, when the wind had finally died down, Flynn found Violet alone in the dining room, polishing the tables by lamplight. Most of the boarders had retired to their rooms, and Martha had gone to bed early with a headache. "May I talk to you?" Flynn asked from the doorway. Violet's heart skipped. Of course. He came and sat at one of the tables, his hands folded in front of him. "I will be leaving tomorrow morning, heading back to the ranch, but I wanted to ask you something first." "What is it?" Flynn took a deep breath. "My aunt tells me you are a hard worker, honest and reliable. I am in need of someone to help manage the house at the ranch. The work would be similar to what you do here, cooking and cleaning, but there would be other tasks too. Helping with the garden in spring, preserving food, maybe learning to handle the chickens and the dairy cow. It's isolated out there and the work is hard. But you would have your own room, fair wages, and I give you my word that you would be treated with respect." Violet stared at him, unable to process what he was offering. "You want to hire me?" "Yes. I know you have not been in Caldwell long and you might want to stay here with my aunt. But I thought I should offer in case you were interested in a change." "Why me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. I could be lazy or dishonest or terrible at the work." Flynn's mouth quirked in a small smile. "My aunt knows you and I trust her judgment absolutely, and I have seen you working these past few days. You do not shy away from hard tasks and you do them thoroughly. That tells me what I need to know." Violet did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to leap at the opportunity to escape the boarding house where she was reminded daily of her failure and humiliation. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times, whispered warnings. "I need to think about it." "Of course," Flynn said. "Talk to my aunt. Think it over. I will be in town for supplies again in 2 weeks. You can give me your answer then." After he left the next morning, Violet did exactly what he suggested. She talked to Martha, who was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea. "Flynn needs someone out there," Martha said as they kneaded bread together. "He has been managing alone since his parents died, and that house has suffered for it. He tried hiring someone last year, but she lasted less than a month, said it was too lonely and too much work." "That does not sound encouraging," Violet said. Martha shook her head. "That woman was lazy and afraid of hard work. She expected to sit around eating bonbons all day. You are not like that. And Flynn is not like most men, Violet. He would never take advantage of you or treat you poorly." "I would stake my life on it. But we would be alone out there," Violet said. "People would talk." "People always talk," Martha said dismissively. "But Flynn runs a working ranch. There are usually a couple of ranch hands around, even in winter. And you would have your own quarters, completely separate from his. It would be a proper working arrangement, nothing scandalous about it." Over the next 2 weeks, Violet thought of little else. She imagined what it might be like to live away from town, to not have to see Samuel Pritchard's smug face or endure the pitying looks from people who knew her story. She thought about having her own room, earning real wages, learning new skills. And if she was honest with herself, she thought about seeing Flynn Henderson every day, about those kind blue eyes and steady presence. When Flynn returned to town as promised, Violet had made her decision. She found him at the general store, loading supplies into a wagon. "Mr. Henderson," she called, and he turned immediately. "Miss Walsh, have you thought about my offer?" "I have," she said, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "And I accept, if you are still willing to hire me." The smile that spread across Flynn's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am very willing. Can you be ready to leave tomorrow morning?" "Yes," Violet said, and felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Yes, I can." Martha helped her pack that evening, adding extra blankets and warm clothes to Violet's meager belongings. "You are doing the right thing," Martha said firmly. "And if you need anything at all, you can always come back here. You will always have a place with me." Violet hugged the older woman, blinking back tears. "Thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have survived," Martha said. "You are stronger than you think, Violet Walsh. Do not ever forget that." The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Flynn arrived with the wagon just after sunrise, and Violet climbed up onto the seat beside him, her trunk secured in the back. As they drove through town, she caught a glimpse of Samuel Pritchard stumbling out of the saloon, looking haggard and drunk even at this early hour. He did not see her, and she felt a fierce satisfaction at that. She was moving forward, building something new, while he was still mired in his own weakness. The road north climbed gradually into rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper. Snow covered everything in a pristine blanket, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Flynn had provided her with a heavy buffalo robe to wrap around her legs, and the heat from his body beside her helped ward off the worst of the chill. They rode in silence for the first hour, and Violet studied the landscape with interest. It was so different from Boston, so open and wild. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the blue sky. Here and there she saw cattle standing in sheltered draws, their breath steaming in the cold air. "The ranch is called the Running H," Flynn said eventually. "My father started it 20 years ago with just 100 acres and a dozen cattle. Now we have 500 acres and about 200 head. It is not the biggest operation around, but it is solid and profitable." "It sounds like you have done well," Violet said. Flynn shrugged. "I have worked hard, but there have been setbacks. 2 years ago we lost 30 head to rustlers. Last year a late frost killed half the hay crop. You learn to adapt and keep going." "Is that what you think I am doing?" Violet asked quietly. "Adapting," Flynn glanced at her, his expression serious. "I think you are surviving, which is more important. And maybe, eventually, you will do more than just survive. Maybe you will thrive." The words settled into Violet's heart like seeds waiting for spring. She wanted to believe him, wanted to imagine a future where she was more than just a rejected bride, more than just a hired servant. But hope felt dangerous, and she kept it locked away carefully. They reached the ranch in the early afternoon. The house was a sturdy structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and a steep roof to shed snow. Outbuildings clustered nearby, including a barn, a bunkhouse, and various sheds. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and as they pulled up, 2 men emerged to help unload the wagon. "This is Tom and Charlie," Flynn said, introducing them. "They have been working here since my father's time. Men, this is Miss Walsh. She will be managing the house." Tom was older, maybe 50, with a grizzled beard and shrewd eyes. Charlie was younger, perhaps Violet's age, with a friendly smile and red hair. Both men touched their hat brims respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you, madam," Tom said. "About time someone civilized took charge of that house. Flynn's been living like a bachelor too long." Flynn's ears turned red. "Let me show you inside," he said to Violet. The house was indeed in need of a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a cast iron stove in the corner for cooking. Dust covered every surface and the floor needed scrubbing. But the bones of the house were good, with solid furniture and plenty of space. Flynn led her down a short hallway to a door. "This was my mother's sewing room," he said, opening it. "I moved a bed in here for you. It is not much, but it is private and it stays warm from the kitchen stove." The room was small but pleasant, with a window looking out toward the mountains and a simple bed covered with a worn quilt. A washstand and a small dresser completed the furnishings. Violet set down her satchel and turned to Flynn. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Thank you." Flynn looked relieved. "I will let you get settled. Supper is usually around 6. Nothing fancy, just whatever I can throw together. But starting tomorrow, meals will be your responsibility." He paused at the door. "Violet, I know this is strange for both of us, but I want you to feel safe here. If you need anything, or if Tom or Charlie make you uncomfortable in any way, you tell me immediately." "Understood." "Understood," Violet said, touched by his concern. After he left, she sat on the bed and looked around her new home. It was not what she had imagined when she left Boston, but it was something. A place of her own, work that would give her purpose, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to rebuild her life into something worth living. She unpacked her few belongings and spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the house and taking stock of what supplies existed. The pantry was poorly stocked, with mostly beans, flour, and preserved meat. The kitchen equipment was basic but functional. She would need to make a list of things to purchase on the next trip to town. That evening, she cooked her first meal for Flynn and the ranch hands. Nothing elaborate, just beans and salt pork with fresh biscuits, but the men ate with obvious appreciation. Flynn closed his eyes after the first bite of biscuit. "I had forgotten what good bread tastes like," he said. "This is wonderful, Violet." The compliment warmed her more than she wanted to admit. After the meal, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Violet cleaned up while Flynn sat at the table working on the ranch accounts. It felt strangely domestic, almost comfortable, and Violet found herself stealing glances at him as she worked. In the lamplight, his hair looked more golden than blonde, and she noticed the small scar on his chin that she had not seen before. "You are staring," Flynn said without looking up, but she could hear the smile in his voice. Violet's face flamed. "I apologize, I did not mean to." Flynn looked up then, his expression gentle. "It is all right. I find myself watching you too sometimes. I think we are both trying to figure each other out." The honesty of his words disarmed her. "Yes," she admitted, "I suppose we are." "Well, for what it is worth, I think we are going to work well together," Flynn said. "You have only been here one day and already the house feels different, more like a home." Violet did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and finished the dishes. But as she lay in her small room that night, listening to the wind whistle around the house, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of hope. The days fell into a rhythm. Violet rose before dawn to start breakfast, feeding Flynn and the ranch hands hearty meals of eggs, bacon, potatoes, and biscuits. After breakfast, she tackled the housework, scrubbing floors, washing linens, and slowly bringing order to the neglected rooms. In the afternoons, She prepared supper and worked on mending or other tasks that needed attention. Flynn was gone most days, working with the cattle or repairing fences, or tending to the 100 other tasks that running a ranch required. But he always came in for meals and often in the evenings. He sat at the table while she worked, talking about the ranch or asking her about her life in Boston. She found herself opening up to him gradually, telling him about her childhood, her mother's illness, the desperate poverty that had driven her west. Flynn listened without judgment, and he shared his own stories in return. She learned about his father's stubborn determination to make the ranch succeed, his mother's love of gardening, and the terrible winter when influenza had taken them both within 3 days of each other. "I was not ready," Flynn admitted one evening. "I thought I had more time to learn everything I needed to know, but death does not wait for you to be ready." "No," Violet agreed quietly. "It does not." They fell into an easy companionship that surprised them both. Flynn started teaching her about the ranch, showing her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to milk the cow, how to recognize the different cattle brands. Violet proved to be a quick learner, and she took satisfaction in mastering new skills. One afternoon in early January, Flynn came in from working in the cold looking exhausted. Violet had made a pot of coffee, and she poured him a cup without being asked. "Long day?" she asked. "Found a section of fence down on the north pasture," Flynn said, wrapping his cold hands around the mug. "Took hours to repair in this weather. Lost 2 calves to wolves while the fence was down." "I am sorry," Violet said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Flynn looked at her with something like wonder. "You are helping just by being here." Coming home to a warm house and a hot meal, having someone to talk to, it makes everything easier. "You have no idea what a difference you have made, Violet." The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Violet felt her pulse quicken and looked away. "I should start supper." But as she worked, she was acutely aware of Flynn sitting behind her, and she wondered if he could hear how fast her heart was beating. The truth was that Violet was falling in love, and it terrified her. She had told herself she would never trust a man again, never open herself up to that kind of pain. But Flynn was making it impossible to keep those walls intact. He was kind without being condescending, strong without being domineering, and he treated her like an equal rather than a servant. She noticed small things about him that made her chest ache. The way he always made sure she had enough firewood for the kitchen. The way he fixed the loose hinge on her bedroom door without being asked. The way he said her name, soft and careful, like it was something precious. And she saw the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. There was hunger in those looks, but also tenderness, and it made her feel things she had thought long dead. February brought a brief warm spell that melted much of the snow and turned the ranch into a muddy mess. Flynn and the ranch hands worked from dawn to dusk, moving cattle to better pasture and preparing for spring calving. Violet rarely saw Flynn except at meals, and she surprised herself by how much she missed his company. One evening, Flynn came in later than usual, covered in mud and looking grim. Violet had kept supper warm for him, and she set a plate in front of him without comment. "Thank you," he said quietly. She sat down across from him with her mending. "Bad day. Lost a cow and her calf in a bog. By the time we found them, it was too late." Flynn pushed food around his plate without eating. "I should have checked that pasture sooner. I knew the ground would be soft from the thaw." "You cannot be everywhere at once," Violet said gently. "You did the best you could." Flynn looked up at her, his eyes shadowed with guilt and exhaustion. "Sometimes my best is not good enough." Violet set down her mending and reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him, and she felt the shock of contact run through them both. "Your best is more than good enough," she said firmly. "You work harder than any person I have ever known. You care for this land and these animals with everything you have. You cannot control every outcome, Flynn. You can only do your best and forgive yourself when things go wrong." Flynn turned his hand over, his fingers curling around hers. His hand was rough and calloused, so much larger than hers, and the warmth of it made her shiver. "How did you get so wise?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am not wise," Violet said. "I have just had practice at failing and surviving it." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, something profound passing between them without words. Then Flynn released her hand and picked up his fork. "You are right," he said. "Thank you for reminding me." That night, Violet lay awake thinking about the feel of Flynn's hand in hers, about the way he had looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. She knew she was in dangerous territory, but she could not seem to pull back. Every day she spent with Flynn made her care for him more, made her want things she had no right to want. March arrived with a vengeance, bringing late blizzards that trapped them all inside for days at a time. Violet and Flynn spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved poetry, which surprised her, and that his mother had taught him to read with books of Wordsworth and Tennyson. He learned that she had always wanted to learn to ride a horse, and he promised to teach her when spring truly arrived. One evening, they sat closer together than usual, both reading by lamplight. Violet looked up from her book to find Flynn watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. Flynn seemed to struggle with himself, then said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that?" Violet's heart was pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. "Yes." Flynn set down his book and turned to face her fully. "When my aunt told me about you, about what happened with Pritchard, I felt angry on your behalf. But I also felt something else, something I did not fully understand at the time. When I met you, when I saw you for the first time, something in me recognized something in you. Like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." Violet opened her mouth to speak, but Flynn held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I know you came here just to work, and I have tried to honor that. I have tried to be professional and appropriate. But Violet, I am failing. Every day I spend with you, I fall more in love with you. The way you hum while you cook, the way you wrinkle your nose when you are concentrating, the way you are not afraid to tell me when you think I am being foolish. You have brought light into this house, into my life, and I do not want to imagine going back to how things were before you came." He took a shaky breath. "I am not asking you to feel the same way. I know you have been hurt, and I know you have every reason not to trust men. But I needed you to know how I feel, and if you do not feel the same, we will never speak of it again and nothing will change between us. You will always have a place here and you will always be safe with me. I swear that on my life." Violet felt tears streaming down her face. "Flynn." "You do not have to say anything," Flynn said quickly, misreading her tears. "I understand. I should not have said anything. Please do not cry." "I am not crying because I am upset," Violet said, her voice breaking. "I am crying because I feel the same way and I am terrified." Flynn froze. "You do?" "Yes," Violet whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that I was setting myself up to be hurt again, but I cannot help it, Flynn. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way no one ever has before. I love you and it scares me more than anything ever has." Flynn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "I will never hurt you," he said, his voice intense. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me. I swear it, Violet." When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, and everything Violet had dreamed of but never believed she would have. His lips were soft against hers, and she could feel the tremor in his hands where they cradled her face. She kissed him back, letting herself believe for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. When they finally pulled apart, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. Violet laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "You have known me for less than 3 months. I do not care. I know everything I need to know. I love you and I want to build a life with you. Marry me, Violet, please." She should have said it was too soon. She should have been cautious and sensible. But she had spent her whole life being careful, and where had it gotten her? Maybe it was time to be brave instead. "Yes," she said, and watched Flynn's face transform with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." Flynn kissed her again, deeper this time, and Violet felt like she was flying. All the pain and disappointment and fear of the past months fell away, and there was only this moment, only this man who loved her for exactly who she was. They told Tom and Charlie the next morning over breakfast. The two ranch hands exchanged knowing looks. "About time," Tom said gruffly. "We have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Glad you finally figured it out," Charlie grinned. "Congratulations, boss. Miss Walsh, you are getting a good man." "I know," Violet said, looking at Flynn with all the love she felt shining in her eyes. They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who passed through Caldwell. Martha was Violet's only witness, and she cried through the entire ceremony. Samuel Pritchard was not at the wedding, though word of it spread through town quickly enough. Violet heard later that he had drunk himself into a stupor when he learned about it, but she found she did not care. He belonged to her past, and she was focused on her future. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect. Flynn was patient with Violet's nervousness, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When he finally made love to her, it hurt less than she had feared, and the intimacy of it, the vulnerability, brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Flynn asked, stroking her hair. "More than all right," Violet said. "I just never imagined I could feel this way, like I am complete for the first time in my life." Flynn kissed her forehead. "You are everything I need," he said softly. "Everything I have ever wanted. I will thank God every day for the freezing rain that brought you to me." Life as Flynn's wife was different from life as his housekeeper in ways both subtle and profound. They shared a room now, and Violet woke each morning wrapped in his arms. He kissed her goodbye before heading out to work, and he kissed her hello when he returned. At meals, they sat side by side instead of across from each other, and Flynn would sometimes reach over to take her hand for no reason other than wanting to touch her. But the work remained hard, and spring brought its own challenges. Calving season meant sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Violet learned to help with difficult births, holding lanterns and fetching supplies while Flynn and Tom worked to save struggling mothers and their babies. She witnessed death and birth in equal measure, and she gained a new respect for the brutal realities of ranch life. In May, they planted a garden together, Flynn teaching Violet which seeds to plant and how to space them. She knelt in the dirt beside him, her hands deep in the soil, and felt a profound connection to this land that was now her home. This was so different from Boston, from the crowded tenements and smoky factories. Here, she could see the mountains every day, could breathe air so clean it almost hurt, could watch the sunset paint the sky in colors she had never imagined existed. Summer brought long, golden days of hard work and simple pleasures. Violet learned to ride, as Flynn had promised, starting with a gentle mare named Daisy. At first she was terrified, but Flynn was patient, leading Daisy in circles around the corral until Violet felt secure enough to try on her own. The first time she cantered, she laughed with pure exhilaration, and Flynn whooped from the fence line. They made love under the stars one warm night, riding out to a meadow high in the hills. Flynn spread a blanket on the grass, and they lay together watching the sky darken and the stars emerge. When he kissed her, Violet tasted wildflowers and wind, and she thought she had never been happier. "I want to give you everything," Flynn whispered against her skin. "Everything you have ever wanted." "You already have," Violet said, pulling him closer. "You gave me a home, a purpose, and love. What more could I possibly want?" But life had more to give them. In late August, Violet realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally telling Flynn. They were in the barn when she worked up the courage, watching him curry one of the horses. "Flynn, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, hearing the tremor in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said quickly. "Better than fine. I think I might be pregnant." Flynn dropped the brush and crossed to her in 3 long strides. "Truly?" "I am almost certain," Violet said. "Though I suppose we should wait a bit longer to be absolutely sure." Flynn picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "We are going to have a baby." "Violet, we are going to have a baby," she laughed too, caught up in his joy. When he set her down, he immediately became serious. "You need to rest more. No more heavy lifting. I will hire someone to help with the housework." "Flynn, I am pregnant, not fragile," Violet protested. "Women have been doing farm work while pregnant since the beginning of time." "I do not care," Flynn said stubbornly. "You are my wife, and I am going to take care of you." They compromised, with Violet continuing her regular work, but allowing Flynn to take over the heavier tasks. As her belly grew, she found herself overwhelmed by wonder at the life growing inside her. She had never imagined being a mother, had never allowed herself to dream that far. Now it was happening, and she spent hours planning the nursery and sewing tiny clothes. Martha visited in October and was delighted by the news. "You are glowing," she told Violet. "Pregnancy agrees with you." "I think happiness agrees with me," Violet said, smiling. "I never thought I could be this content, Martha. I wake up every morning grateful." "You deserve it," Martha said firmly. "Both of you do." Winter came early that year, with snow falling in November and temperatures dropping below 0. Violet was large and uncomfortable, her back aching and her ankles swollen. Flynn hovered over her constantly, earning both her affection and her exasperation. "I am fine," she told him for the 100th time one evening in December. "The baby is not due for another month. You do not need to worry so much." "I will stop worrying when you and the baby are both safe and healthy," Flynn said, rubbing her swollen feet, "and probably not even then." But the baby had other plans. 2 weeks before Christmas, Violet woke in the night with sharp pains in her belly. She lay quietly for a moment, hoping they would pass, but they only grew stronger. Finally, she shook Flynn awake. "I think it is time," she said. Flynn was instantly alert. "But it is too early. You said another month." "Babies come when they come," Violet said through gritted teeth as another pain gripped her. "Send Charlie for Martha, and try not to panic." Flynn sent Charlie galloping toward town despite the snow and cold, then came back to help Violet. She was grateful for all the birthing she had witnessed with the cattle, because it gave her some idea of what to expect. But animal births and human births were different things, and as the hours passed and the pains grew worse, she began to fear that something was wrong. Martha arrived as dawn was breaking, snow-covered and out of breath. She took one look at Violet and sent Flynn out of the room. "Go boil water and gather clean towels," she ordered, "and stay out until I call for you." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort and fear. Violet had never experienced anything so intense, so all-consuming. But Martha's steady presence helped, and she clung to the older woman's hands as she pushed and screamed and pushed again. Finally, as the winter sun climbed toward noon, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. Martha wrapped the infant in a blanket and placed the bundle in Violet's arms. "You have a son," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "A healthy, perfect son." Violet looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, and felt love so fierce it stole her breath. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother." Flynn burst into the room, ignoring Martha's protests. He knelt beside the bed, staring at the baby with wonder. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are perfect," Violet said, smiling through her exhaustion. "Come meet your son." Flynn touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, and the infant's fingers curled around it instinctively. Flynn made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is so small. He will grow," Violet said. "They always do." They named him William after Flynn's father, and he was the center of their world from the moment he drew breath. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with William when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and singing lullabies in his deep voice. Violet would watch them together and feel her heart swell to the point of bursting. Spring came again, and William grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby who laughed at everything. The ranch flourished too, with a successful calving season and good prices for their cattle. Flynn hired another ranch hand to help with the increased work, a quiet man named Ezra who proved to be reliable and hardworking. On their second wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Violet with a present, a beautiful mare, dark bay with a white star on her forehead. "She is yours," Flynn said, handing Violet the lead rope. "I know you have not had much time to ride since William was born, but I thought having your own horse might give you more freedom." Violet threw her arms around his neck. "She is perfect, thank you." "There is something else," Flynn said, looking pleased with himself. "I have been saving money, and I spoke with the bank. We have enough to buy the adjacent property, another 200 acres with good water rights. It would make the ranch more secure for the future, for William and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Violet asked, raising an eyebrow. "How many are you planning?" Flynn grinned. "As many as you are willing to give me, but only if you want them too." Violet thought about it, about the joy William had brought to their lives, about the love that overflowed from this house. "Yes," she said. "I want that. A house full of children, a growing ranch, a long life with you. I want it all," and she got it. Over the next years, 2 more children joined their family. A daughter named Rose who had Flynn's blue eyes and Violet's dark hair, and another son named James who was the image of his father. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Tom and Charlie remained part of their family, becoming honorary uncles to the children. Martha visited often, delighting in her great-nieces and nephews. Sometimes, usually on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she and Flynn sat together on the porch watching the stars, Violet thought about that terrible day when she had arrived in Caldwell, soaked and rejected and hopeless. She thought about the girl she had been, so desperate and afraid, and she barely recognized her. That girl had believed she was unwanted, that she had nothing to offer, that she would always be less than enough. But Flynn had seen something different. He had looked past her threadbare clothes and her painful past and seen the woman she could become. He had given her not just love, but the chance to discover her own strength and worth. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am thinking about how you saved my life," Violet said honestly. Flynn shook his head. "You saved your own life. You survived everything that happened to you and kept going. I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed someone." "You were more than just someone," Violet said. "You were everything. You looked at me in that freezing rain, broken and rejected, and somehow you saw me, the real me, and you said I was everything you needed." Flynn pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because you were, you are. From the moment I met you, I knew you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. Whatever higher power brought you to Idaho that day, I thank them every single night." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Inside the house, their children slept safely, and around them, the ranch that they had built together stood strong and enduring. Violet thought about all the years stretching ahead of them, all the challenges they would face and overcome together, all the love they would share and grow. She had come west as a mail-order bride, desperate and alone, seeking only survival. She had found so much more. She had found her home, her purpose, and the love of her life. She had found herself. And it had all begun with a cowboy who looked at her in the freezing rain and saw not a failure, but everything he needed. The years continued to unfold like the pages of a treasured book. William grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, following Flynn around from the time he could walk, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and the land. Rose was spirited and fearless, climbing trees and riding horses before Violet thought she was ready. James was the gentle one, preferring books to ranch work, though he never shirked his responsibilities. Flynn taught all three children to ride, to work hard, and to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. Violet taught them to read and write, using the books Flynn's mother had saved, and she passed on the lessons she had learned about survival and resilience. When William turned 18, Flynn made him a full partner in the ranch. It was what Flynn's father would have done for him, and he wanted William to feel the pride and responsibility of ownership. William took to the role with enthusiasm, bringing new ideas and energy that helped the ranch continue to thrive. Rose surprised them all by falling in love with Ezra's son, a hardworking young man who treated her like a queen. Flynn was reluctant to let his daughter go, but Violet reminded him that they had married young too, and they had been happy. The wedding was held at the ranch on a beautiful June day, and Violet cried as she watched Rose dance with her new husband, remembering her own wedding and how far they had all come. James decided to become a teacher, moving to Boise to attend the new college there. It was hard to see him go, but Violet understood his need to forge his own path. He visited often, bringing stories of his students and his studies, and Violet was proud of the thoughtful, educated man he had become. Through it all, Flynn remained Violet's constant companion and greatest love. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly, but their love only deepening with time. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with just a glance, and still made each other laugh after all these years. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Violet back to the meadow where they had made love under the stars so many years ago. They were older now, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but Violet felt the same flutter in her chest as he spread a blanket on the grass. 25 years, Flynn said, pulling her down beside him. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. A good forever, Violet said, leaning against his shoulder. The best forever I could have imagined. Flynn turned to face her, his blue eyes still as bright and clear as the day she met him. Do you ever regret it, coming west, marrying me, building this life? Never, Violet said fiercely. Not for one single moment, you gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself, and that was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Flynn kissed her, soft and sweet, and Violet tasted salt and realized he was crying. She pulled back to look at him. "What is it?" "I am just so grateful," Flynn said, his voice breaking. "I think about what my life would have been without you, and it is like imagining a world without the sun. Empty and cold and colorless. You brought light and warmth and meaning to everything. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." "We made each other better," Violet corrected. "That is what love does. It does not complete us because we were already complete, but it makes us more than we were, stronger and braver and fuller." They lay together under the stars, just as they had done so many times before, and Violet thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperation that had driven her west, the rejection that had nearly broken her, the chance encounter that had changed everything. She thought about Samuel Pritchard, and she realized she felt nothing but pity for him. He had let fear and shallowness rob him of what could have been, and from what she heard, he had died alone and bitter, destroyed by drink and poor choices. She did not celebrate his death, but neither did she mourn it. He had made his choices, and they had made theirs. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the barn?" Flynn asked suddenly. "When I found you crying," Violet searched her memory and shook her head. "No, I do not remember crying in the barn." "It was about a month after you came to the ranch," Flynn said. "You thought I was asleep, but I heard you. You were talking to yourself or maybe praying, and you said, 'I just want to matter to someone.' It broke my heart." Violet did remember now, the desperate loneliness of those early days when she was still learning to trust that this new life was real. "I did not know you heard that. I wanted to go to you right then," Flynn said. "I wanted to tell you that you mattered to me, that you had already become essential to my happiness. But I was afraid of scaring you away. So I waited, and I tried to show you instead of tell you." "You succeeded," Violet said, her throat tight with emotion. "I have never felt insignificant or unimportant for a single day since I married you. You made me matter, Flynn. You made me believe I was worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Flynn said firmly. "I just had the privilege of being the one to show you." They stayed in the meadow until the sky began to lighten, talking about their past, their present, and their future. They talked about their children and their grandchildren, about the ranch and what would happen to it when they were gone. They made plans and dreamed dreams, and when they finally rode home as the sun rose, Violet felt the same sense of rightness and belonging she had felt every day since Flynn had asked her to marry him. The years continued their steady march. Violet watched her children grow and have families of their own. She held her grandchildren and told them stories about Boston and the journey west, about how their grandfather had saved her life with his kindness and his love. She taught them to cook and clean and work hard, passing on the skills that had sustained her through the hardest times. Flynn's hair turned white, and his step grew slower, but he never lost his strength or his humor. He worked the ranch until the day he could not anymore, and even then he sat on the porch giving advice and watching his sons and grandsons carry on his legacy. When Flynn finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Violet lay beside him that morning and held his hand, talking to him even though he could not respond, thanking him for the life they had shared. William found them like that at dawn, and he wept as he gently closed his father's eyes. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Idaho and beyond to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, generosity, and kindness. Violet stood beside the grave with her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and she did not cry. She had already cried all her tears in private. Now she was determined to celebrate the incredible life Flynn had lived and the love they had shared. After everyone left, she returned to the grave alone. She knelt in the grass and placed her hand on the freshly turned earth. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for loving me so completely. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. I will love you until my last breath and whatever comes after that." Violet lived 5 more years without Flynn, and they were good years. She spent them surrounded by her family, watching her grandchildren grow and tending the garden she and Flynn had planted together so long ago. She never remarried, never even considered it. Flynn had been her one great love, and she was content to live on the memories of what they had shared. On a warm May morning, she did not wake up. Rose found her in her bed, looking peaceful with a smile on her face. On her nightstand was an old, faded photograph of her and Flynn on their wedding day, both of them young and hopeful and so very much in love. They buried her next to Flynn, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. William stood and spoke at the funeral, his voice steady despite his grief. "Our mother taught us that strength is not about never falling down," he said. "It is about getting back up, no matter how many times you fall." She came to Idaho with nothing but hope and determination, and she built a life that touched everyone who knew her. She loved fiercely and worked tirelessly, and never let hardship define her. We should all be so lucky to live as fully as she did. On their shared gravestone, beneath their names and dates, William had inscribed a simple phrase: "She was everything he needed, and he was everything she needed." Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would play in the house Flynn built, would ride horses across the land he claimed, and would hear stories about the mail-order bride who was rejected in the freezing rain and the cowboy who loved her. The story became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best. The Running H Ranch continued to thrive, generation after generation carrying on the legacy Flynn and Violet had started. And on cold November nights, when freezing rain swept across the Idaho plains, family members swore they could feel the presence of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from nothing, and whose love had echoed through time itself. It was a love story for the ages, born in desperation and rejection, but growing into something strong and enduring and absolutely true. It was a story about second chances and the courage to believe in them. It was a story about seeing past surface appearances to recognize true worth. Most of all, it was a story about 2 people who found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. And it all began with a woman standing in the freezing rain, rejected and alone, and a cowboy who looked at her and saw not what she lacked, but everything he had been searching for his entire life. It began with one man's willingness to take a chance, to extend kindness when it was not expected, and to love without reservation or condition. That was the legacy Violet and Flynn left behind. Not just land and buildings and prosperity, but the knowledge that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness could change lives, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Their story ended as all good stories should, with love triumphant, with family gathered close, and with the certainty that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. Violet Walsh, the rejected mail-order bride from Boston, and Flynn Henderson, the Idaho cowboy who saw her true worth, had found their happily ever after against all odds. And in the end, that was all that mattered.